have the Ayatollah of fantasy rock and roll with us today, Adam Rank. How you doing, Rank?
They look great in person, and I just can't wait to next year where we can pack it full of 25,000.
Hey, Bob, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. I didn't know it was Ball Guys Day. It was being ranked. I mean, how can you lose?
This is the Dynasty Vipers ViperCast.
All roads are leading to the Dynasty Vipers ViperCast presented by the Fantasy Points Media Group. And joining us today, hey, I've got Tara joining me like each and every week, but we've got the one and only Lindsay Rhodes joining us. How you doing, Lindsay?
Hey, happy to be here. That's a fancy open.
You know what? We've talked about this. I've talked to some other people that came onto the show here. I said, we're just trying to fake it till we make it. I mean, if we can kind of come across as presentable, a little bit of graphics, a little bit of video, trick people into coming and watching the show, then once they're in here, then we can do our work here. And that's where the guests like you come in and absolutely nail it down for us. Now, Tara, she comes out with all kinds of great information. I'm really not too sure what I'm doing on here other tin pushing buttons at this point.
I have a feeling we'll find out otherwise.
You know what? It's just the mustache, really. That's what it's all about here. Is just bringing the mustache to the TV. If you're listening on audio, I've always been kind of the guy who's got that face for radio and the voice for the silent pitchers. But hey, let's talk about running backs. We are early. It's May right now, heading into June. This is the fantasy off season, and we need to know which running backs have the toughest road to success in 2022. Over to you, Lindsay.
Is that like RHODE to success?
Absolutely. These are the toughest roads
to
success in 2022.
Yeah, I don't know. So I have to start with a disclaimer, and that is that I am the type of fantasy player that I never take schedule into consideration until it's like week of. This is just like, I don't have enough bandwidth in my brain to put all of those different layers in it and still come out with a conclusion that isn't completely overthought. You know what I mean? Like, this is a full paralysis by analysis thing, I think, that can happen in fantasy where you overthink that. And I think one of the things that we tend to do is maybe overvalue that, right? Like, if you're really good, if you're a very good running back, like in this case, then you are going to do well even against a very good run defense, right? Like a good wide receiver, even if they have a really tough cornerback matchup, all you need to do is win a couple of those plays, right? And then you've got the fantasy points that we all need for a good outing. So I try not to overthink the schedule in terms of going into like how I rank the season. But obviously there are a few that stand out as having particularly good schedules. Obviously the Broncos, and the fact that they have a very good early season schedule in particular, I think is particularly interesting for them because they have so many new pieces to the offense. And so while they get their feet wet and kind of figure out who they're going to be and get into a rhythm with one another, I think that it is beneficial that they face Seattle and Houston to start, and then the Jets and the Jaguars early in the season. Gets a little bit tougher at the end of the season, but I think it will benefit them as they get their footing, literally from the running back standpoint. But then again, I don't love the fact that they brought Melvin Gordon back, right? Like, none of us in the fantasy community are happy about that. So what are we supposed to do with Javonte Williams? We've already had guest number 1 enter the chat. So obviously we love Javonte Williams, and that is, you know, something that is just an added bonus, is the fact that the schedule is good to get out the gate. DeAndre Swift is another running back that I like on a team that I think I like more than a lot of other people like them. So I think I will probably value DeAndre Swift more than a lot of other people will, just because I think that the Lions are going to be, I don't think they're going to, like, you know, win the Super Bowl or anything like that. That's not the conversation that I'm putting them in. I just think that they're the type of team where, like, from a win total standpoint, I would take the over. I think that they're going to be a lot more competitive in games than I think a lot of other people are probably anticipating. And so I think that his usage will be better than, I think a lot of people look at the Lions and think negative game script. And I don't necessarily see that for DeAndre Swift, who I think has been incredible. And the playoff schedule for him is the Jets and the Panthers and the Bears. And the Panthers, obviously, defense wasn't bad last year, but I think the offense is going to be pretty darn awful. And so that will keep the Detroit Lions in that game and in a position where they can stick to the run. I'm curious to know from you guys, though, how much. I already said that I don't really necessarily think about these things until it's like DFS week of, obviously. And when you're making flex decisions on a week-to-week basis or a waiver wire decision. But when it comes time to draft a player earlier in the season, is this something that you take into consideration?
I know for myself, I do take a look at that strength of schedule down the stretch. I believe when I'm drafting a team that I like to believe I'm a good enough drafter to put the pieces together to get myself to the playoffs, and then kind of rely on that strength of schedule down the stretch. Now, if I'm trying to decide between running back A and running back B, then I might kind of go in there if they're pretty close, pretty equal type situation. Like you're looking at maybe a David Montgomery versus Josh Jacobs type situation here. So if I look at the strength of schedule, I look at Vegas at the running back position, the 22nd most difficult strength of schedule, where the Bears, like you mentioned here a little bit earlier, they're sitting here with the number 1 strength of schedule. So for me, that's probably going to give me a little bit more favoritism towards David Montgomery over Josh Jacobs. But like you said, the cream always rises to the top here when you're talking about running backs. Even if Jonathan Taylor has the 30th easiest schedule, the most difficult, he's still going to be your RB1. There's certain no-brainers when you look at this. And when I look at the strength of schedule here, it kind of plays out where the good teams actually have pretty favorable schedules, where the teams that are not as good actually have a difficult schedule, which is kind of backwards here. But you look at some of these: Chicago at number 1. I've got Miami at 3, Denver at 2, like you mentioned, Javonte, Melvin Ingram. We know that they can support one another, as it looks like. Arizona, James Conner's got the 5th easiest schedule, and Chase Edmondson's gone. So then when you look at some of the more difficult ones, Atlanta, we don't even know who the running back is going to be in Atlanta. We'll talk about some of these other roads to success here in just a second, but you got some teams here. Houston, same situation. Carolina, if Christian McCaffrey's there. Here's one of those examples. The 26th strength of schedule there. Christian McCaffrey still probably go in the first 2 rounds of your fantasy draft, even if you are scared of the injury prognosis each and every year when it comes to McCaffrey. You're still going to take him early and hope for the best. But I kind of look at this. The Rams, Cam Akers, another question mark there, coming back from that Achilles, 28th strength of schedule there. So, Tara, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I am right now because I'm in the middle of those eliminator guillotine drafts, and that is kind of making a big difference with the strength of schedule. But in general, outside of that, not too much. I will say the only situation is when it is an incredibly difficult schedule. Like, let's say the Jets. They're someone who I was looking at, and I know a lot of fantasy people were looking at, as pieces that you might want to invest in this year, that they're a well-coached team. They've got guys that are going to maybe overperform expectations. And, when that schedule came out, it kind of did a little bit of a jab there of like, okay, that's not the best schedule in the world. It makes you kind of think a little bit twice there. The situation, especially with the running backs, I mean, you want to trust Breece Hall. You want to know that he's the number 1 there, but you don't really know how much they're going to lean towards the committee over there. So I take it.
Are they going to be able to score points? Right? Zach has to be a lot better.
Zach Wilson. Yeah. And so when that schedule came out, it made me let me back off a little bit on that. So if it's a big difference maker, I'm going to key in on it. If it's kind of a middle of the road situation, like you were saying, Matt, it's not going to be a huge decision maker for me unless it's really, really close between 2 guys.
Yeah. See, Matt, you said something earlier that you used, and I don't know if you used them specifically as examples or just 2 names that you pulled out, but David Montgomery and Josh Jacobs. See, I would tend to unknot that just based on how I feel about the offense in general. Like, I think that Josh Jacobs is actually somebody that I like more in fantasy this coming year than I did last year, because I think Devontae Adams opens things up for him at the line of scrimmage. Like, the way that the offense was built last year, they just didn't have anyone to stretch the defense. And so it was a big concern for me all year long that they have Waller and they have Renfro, and like, it's all in the same space, that I thought would make it much easier for a defense to swallow up Josh Jacobs. So it's almost counterintuitive to me that he's got another year under his belt. I keep thinking that he's older than he is. It's like bizarre to me to think that he's so young compared to other running backs in the league. So I have to keep reminding myself of that because I feel like he's been around for a million years. But going into year 5, I think the fact that he was, third in the league in forced missed tackles last season, he has that elusive thing that you're looking for in a running back as like a tell that he can still play and still pick up those yards that the offense isn't creating for you. And I think the fact that you've got Devontae Adams there, I actually like him more. The opportunity from a volume standpoint is obviously going to go down, but I anticipate that the offense is going to be more successful and have more touchdown scoring capabilities than they had last season. Whereas David Montgomery, even though he's got an easier schedule, I look at the offense and I'm like, are they going to move the ball? Even against a bad run defense where it makes total sense to hand the ball off to David Montgomery, and then Justin Fields can obviously take advantage of that. Also, I look at the offense and I think, I don't know how you're going to consistently move the ball down the field. So I don't know if you're going to be in a negative game script situation where, as there might be weeks that are a little bit, better. I tend to, in terms of weighing the two, I'm like, I just don't like the offense. So I would actually go the other way and take Josh Jacobs if I was deciding between the two, based on all the factors I just considered.
I think Josh Jacobs for many fantasy managers is like that ultimate wild card. We don't know how to value him. At the end of the year, when it's all said and done, when the dust settles, he is in that RB10 to RB12 range each and every year. He wins out on that war of attrition each every year, somehow manages to stay healthy enough when all the other backs go down, and he slides himself in there, despite us giving him RB24 status before every single season. We do this every year with Josh Jacobs, and I feel like we're about to do it one more time. Josh McDaniels is there running that offense. From the past that he's like to get James White involved in the passing game. Kenyon Drake is already there. So for a lot of managers, they're trying to figure out, maybe when we get into training camp, how is this dynamic between Josh and Drake? I mean, a lot of people with Nickelodeon days, they remember Josh and Drake, but it's like, where are we going to go with this? How do we evaluate this backfield in particular? Because both backs are very capable. And Josh Jacobs, the last couple of years, he's either had 1,000 yards or been darn close to 1,000 yards. He's had either double-digit touchdowns or been darn close to double-digit touchdowns each year. You know what you're going to get. You're going to get consistency out of him. It's just where that consistency is going to rank when the dust all settles. And where do you feel? Do you think Kenyon Drake and Josh McDaniels may have some sort of alliance to kind of keep Josh Jacobs a little bit out in the dark there a little bit?
I think Kenyon Drake is an afterthought there. I think Kenyon Drake is not. I mean, we'll see with this new coaching staff if they view it differently, but I don't see much need to incorporate Kenyon Drake in that offense as it stands right now. I think Josh Jacobs is the kind of guy who can do all of the different things that they're looking for him to do. I think we've seen him do it for them. And so my guess is that he's more of a handcuff. That's just my best guess at this point. I don't know why you would try to supplant him. There's no R in that word.
Well, we know all roads lead to success in Indianapolis. Jonathan Taylor's got the 8th easiest
100%.
strength of schedule. He's on the highway he's going, but there's some fantasy dirt roads that we got to pay attention to and try and figure out what is going on in Miami. This is actually a very favorable schedule for running backs, except the situation is not favorable by any stretch of anyone's imagination. You got Chase Edmonds in there getting paid as an RB1 who does have a little bit of injury risk associated with him. Raheem Mostert, he knows this system. He's played in this system. Again, an injury kind of guy himself. And then you got Sony Michel, who is a 2-time Super Bowl champion, just hanging out there, just biding his time once again. Is there any road to success for any of these backs in 2022?
I don't know. I think, for those of us that are looking to make this decision for our redraft leagues, I think we'll probably have a little bit of a better idea once we've had a couple of weeks of training camp and people have had a chance to just see like who appears to be in the lead and how they appear to be using them. There are so many offensive weapons there all of a sudden in Miami. And I love it for Miami. And I love it from a roster building standpoint. I think the strategy that they employed this offseason to put so many offensive weapons around Tua is so smart, because it's either you get the best version of Tua or you get a really good evaluation of Tua that's totally fair. You have people who can do all of the different things. And so at the end of the year whether or not he's your guy or whether you need to cut bait and go in a different direction. But I like the weapons that they brought in. I just am not 100% sure who it would be. The financials would point to Chase Edmonds, right? Like, I actually didn't like the signing from a contract standpoint at all. I thought they way overpaid for him. But since they did, I think that tells us that they think that he's their guy. Like, why would they do that? And then just be like, oh, just kidding, Mostert's going to be our guy. So, and I think that Chase is the kind of guy who's shown us that he can do a lot of the things that we assume Mike McDaniels is going to want to do there in terms of San Francisco South. So I like the opportunity that will be there for whoever is the running back. And maybe they're just building it much like San Francisco. San Francisco seems like they're always in need of a new running back. And I don't know if that's bad luck, if that's something about what they do that leads to that. I don't know if Mike McDaniel built this running back room with that in mind, because they're constantly rotating through people like that. That San Francisco, whoever is the running back for them, is always a good fantasy weapon for us, right? It's just, it feels like it's someone different every single week for one reason or another. So I would put my money on Chase Edmonds at this point. And I think that the offense is one that will provide an opportunity for fantasy success. Because I think that they'll use them in a bunch of different ways. I think that they'll get creative with those running backs coming out of the backfield, and then obviously just traditional rushing attack. But I don't know if I'm making a choice, depending on where it is in my draft and the other running backs that are around, I might go in a different direction where the backfield's a little bit more clear. I don't know.
Yeah. I completely agree with you. I do think it's going to end up ultimately being Chase Edmonds. I know we're a little fearful of Mostert, although we are getting the news that he might not, they're not really putting a timeline on that injury. So we don't really know exactly where he'll be at the start of the season. So it could be Sony Michel, who's the second best option there. But at what point, so like you were saying, it's kind of a situation where a lot of people are looking at it and they're a little bit fearful of it. They're saying this is a backfield that I want to avoid. If everyone is on the same page, wanting to avoid the values get pushed down, at what point does a bad backfield become a value backfield for you?
That's a good question. I think it's one of those things where you just sort of know it when you see it. Like for me, I'm a tier drafter. And so I kind of know like, okay, these are the guys that I have in this tier. And then if it starts getting down, like there are some people that I don't want to draft, period. And this is where I always get stuck, is like at the back end of the first round, or if somebody, that's normally a middle of the first round type of running back, but there's somebody I don't want, like Saquon this year, right? I didn't want any part of Saquon this year, but then Saquon got pushed in one of my leagues to like, like the beginning of the second round, but like not like one of the first couple of picks, but not quite the middle yet. And I was like, I mean, you kind of have to take him at this point, right? Because the upside you assume is there. Like other people are drafting him like 6 or whatever. And then that's how I screw myself, as somebody who I go, don't draft. This is my do not draft. And then you go against it because the value gets pushed down. So in some cases, I think I have to just create a hard and fast, like, I don't want this person. And if somebody else wants to roll that dice, regardless of the value, I need to stick with my strategy and not take them. But then in cases like a Chase Edmonds, or people where it's just, I'm not clear on the workload situation, or what this backfield's going to look like, then at a certain point when you're up against people that you're like, well, I just don't even like that running back, so I would rather take this over that, before I go to my next tier, so to speak, then I would go ahead and roll that dice.
And then looking at some of these teams with more difficult strengths of schedule here, just going to run off a few teams. You mentioned Saquon Barkley, 27th strength of schedule here. You're not buying him in the first round. You're not buying him early in the second. Where does that become? I'm going to take him. We look at like 207, 208 type range. Is he going to be 100% healthy? I mean, you can't drive on a good highway there with a flat tire.
I I think I don't want Zeke. I mean, not Zeke. I was transitioning my thought to Zeke as somebody that I would buy at a certain point if he dropped. I don't want him early anymore, but if he does drop, then there's still value because I think he'll be on the field because of the value that he brings. And in terms of like the play action, teams biting on him more than Pollard and some other stuff. But in terms of Saquon, I feel like he doesn't have it anymore. I didn't see any burst last year. I don't think, and I don't know how much to attribute that to just being too close to the injury and or not trusting, himself after the injury. I don't know how much is associated with that and how much of it is just this is how he looks now post injury. But I didn't see it from him. And if I haven't seen at least a couple of instances where I can say, well, he still has it, the offense is just completely lacking in creativity and nobody's opening holes. And so he's running into a brick wall every single time. That's not what I saw. I saw him with opportunities and unable to like do anything with it. So now here's where it gets tricky for Saquon for me is he still has hands. We saw him make some great catches last year, and they don't have a lot offensively. So I think that this coaching staff will be more creative, and I could see them using him more as a receiver coming out of the backfield rather than a traditional running back in the rushing attack. And so I do think that he could potentially have some value in that type of way. So for me, I think that the second round is still a little bit too rich for my blood. I don't think he'll go much further than that. And so my guess is that I will let other people draft Saquon. And if it works out as a receiver, or if the burst is still there and I'm just wrong, then I'll let somebody else reap those rewards. But I don't want, my biggest thing as a fantasy person that always makes me upset is when I feel it in my gut that I don't want someone, and then I draft them because they fall to me to a point where I think, well, I have to now because it's everyone else thinks he's so much better than the other options that are here, but I don't. And then if that person doesn't hit, then I hate myself all season. So I have to let other people do that and just like stick to my guns and be a little bit more disciplined when it comes to that. So I don't think I'll have Saquon on my team this year.
Well, if Saquon doesn't hit for the Giants, they're going to be in trouble because I think Matt Breida, Gary Brightwell, those are the guys immediately behind Barkley as far as that depth chart is concerned. Now, two more situations I want to kind of ask you about. One is the Eagles. Where does strength of schedule, tough strength of schedule again for the Eagles, but they had one of the best rushing attacks last year. I mean, that's Hurts, that's Gainwell, that's Sanders. I mean, the Eagles basically hate Sanders, but yet he still produces when given an opportunity to do so. And then the other one is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They don't like to run the ball. They ran the ball fewer than most teams. I think they're in the bottom 3 or 4 as far as rushing attempts. But Uncle Lenny, when he gets going, there's playoff Lenny, there's Uncle Lenny, and there's Leonard Fournette. When either Uncle or playoffs show up, I mean, he gets the job done. How do you feel about both those situations there in Philadelphia and Tampa Bay before we move along?
I think Philadelphia's offense will be better this year. And I think that we'll be able to trust the run game more than last year. Like the fact that it took about the first half of the season for them to even think about handing the ball off to their running back was so perplexing. And I think it hurt their fantasy value in terms of overall value for the year. Like, remember that one game where there was like one handoff? I think there was like one rushing attempt in like either a first half or like the entire game, but it was bizarre. And then toward the end of the season, they figured it out. And there you go. Scene. I told you we were going to have a visitor. I forgot what we were talking about here. The Eagles. I think I like Jalen Hurts more than I think a lot of people like Jalen Hurts. And certainly from a fantasy standpoint, like regardless of whether or not he proves by the end of the year that he is a franchise quarterback, I still think there's going to be tons of fantasy value in Jalen Hurts this year. And I love the addition of AJ Brown to that offense. I think that he does something specific in terms of going over the middle that Jalen Hurts, that's been a weakness for him. So I love that strategically they went out and got a guy who's specifically good in this area that Jalen is not good at. So it's like, here you go. We're going to make this easier for you. Go. And then again, much like I said about Tua, you get a good eval on Jalen, right, by the end of the year. But I think that the way that they've constructed the offense by plugging that wide receiver gap, you can see a little bit more of a straight up offensive play call than I think we've seen. Like last year, I feel like they were calling it weirdly because I feel like they didn't feel like they could throw the ball. So I like Miles. I guess is a long way of saying that I like Miles. I don't really like Miles specifically, but I think that the offense will have a lot of rushing value, if that makes sense. And then I like Lenny, and you got any piece of that Tampa Bay offense. So if it's an either or situation, I think I'd probably have to see how my roster was built already. But I actually do like both of those running backs heading into next year. I'm not like downgrading either of them because of their situation.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm actually, you mentioned Miles Sanders. Yeah, I've always been a never Miles Sanders person as well. Kind of like, there's no point at which he can drop that I would take him. But I'm kind of thinking of reconsidering it a little bit this year along the same lines as what you were saying, because not to veer us off course a little bit, but we talked about Miami and the way that they're surrounding Tua and the way that they're surrounding Jalen Hurts in Philadelphia and upgrading the offenses. Chicago, real quick, they're not doing that. We see all these teams that are around here and, trying to will their young quarterbacks, the Jets as well, will their young quarterbacks to success. And we've got Chicago over here. What's your opinion on the way that they're kind of not surrounding
Chicago? I think they're in a tough spot because I think that two things. They have an awful roster, right? So they need to get better, and you don't want to draft out of desperation. Like, so if they felt like by the time that they got around to drafting that they would be reaching for somebody that they didn't love at the wide receiver position, my guess is that they went into the draft thinking that that was something that they would like to address. And then it just, the way it played out, they didn't find themselves in a position where they felt like they were getting the best value that they wanted where they were drafting. I don't hate them taking defensive players there because their defense is awful too and also needs a lot of work. So in terms of long-term roster building, I get that. It's tough to have used all that draft capital on Justin Fields a year ago and then put him in a position where he pretty much has no paths to success, in year two. I think that that's tough. I don't hate the Velus Jones pick, though. I know a lot of people are really down on that and think that they reached for him. And I understand that. I understand that part. If you could have gotten him two rounds later, then I get that criticism. But I do think that at a certain point, if you need so many things offensively and you can't fill all of those holes, then to go get a guy who is kind of a Swiss Army knife type of player who can do a lot of different things and provide versatility for you and allow you to be more creative in terms of your play calling, because he's done the Debo role, so to speak, right? He's not Debo. That's not a Debo comp, but it's a comp in terms of if you want to start using or calling an offense like that. If you want to have a guy that you can put in those types of Debo-like positions and do a wide back thing, and then he can play special teams and return kicks. And I mean, in Chicago, of all places, we've seen that have a lot of value before. So I don't hate the Velus Jones pick, actually. I think based on all of the holes you needed filled, it might have been a really good option for you at that stage of the draft. And again, if you could have gotten him 2 rounds later, but there's no way to know that. And so if this is the guy that you have pegged and you said that's the guy that we need that's going to check the most boxes for us, then I don't really have a problem with them taking him. Now he just needs to hit.
Yeah.
Well, what the Bears needed is they needed to hit the transfer portal, because we've seen certain colleges build a pretty good team together here. Minus maybe a running back. Well, that's kind of where it's going. They got themselves a coach out of the transfer portal. They got themselves one of the top wide receivers. They got themselves a top quarterback. I mean, you've got to be feeling pretty good about your USC Trojans here.
I know. I feel a little bit gross about the way that it's happening, but also it just is what it is, right? Like, these are the new rules. And if these are the new rules, then like someone's going to benefit. And I guess my attitude is like, it might as well be us. Like, we're not the ones making the rules. So if it's going to be Alabama or it's going to be Clemson or whoever, then I'm glad that it's us, I suppose. I'm not a huge fan of like the Wild West. I have no problem with the players getting paid. It's not that. It's just like the dysregulation of it all. I think you're going to start seeing full on. I think we already are starting to see like haves and have nots. Like, it's obvious the way that USC is getting players now and some other schools, that there's no way. I love USC. There are other teams that have no chance at competing with us, in terms of what we can offer, what our alumni base can offer, how many NIL opportunities are going to come about because the alumni base is so strong and willing to put money behind it to support the team. It's going to start creating like a handful of teams that can compete financially, and then a lot of teams that can't. And I don't know that that's really great for college football. But again, I don't want anyone to interpret that as like a knock on the players getting paid. Like, I don't have a problem with that. I just think somebody needs to actually regulate this in some way, shape, or form so that it doesn't create such a lopsided, NC2A in terms of parity. I think that's totally where we're headed.
I would agree with that 100%. I mean, I love the fact the kids are getting paid. I think they've deserved to get paid for a long time, but this is starting – it feels like what's old is new again. I remember watching Major League Baseball and the NHL way back when teams like Detroit and New York were basically buying championships. It never worked out for them, but they were always getting the big name players each and every time. You're going to see that more and more. Those SEC schools with those deep pockets, USC as well. I mean, I think that's just the new age of which we're going for. And you know what? We are about to call the end of this show here right now because we don't have the deep pocket. So we're going to head over to part 2 of the show here in just a minute. So if you're watching this right now, make sure to head over and check out the Rhodes Show there. And when are you putting that out there? Just kind of let everyone know here how often the Lindsay Rhodes, the Rhodes Show, that's coming at you.
The NFL Rhodes Show is the podcast that I do. And it during the off season, we're putting out 1 a week. During the regular season, we put out 3 a week. And so during the off season, a new one drops every Thursday. The most recent one, we talked to Ryan Clark from ESPN and the Pivot podcast. And I like the off season, and I'm sure you guys do to a degree too, because in the regular season, you're chasing the news cycle. You know what I mean? Everything. There's no time to talk about anything but like, on Monday, we just watched some games. Let's react to them. There's a bunch of stuff to talk about. Later in the week, you're previewing the next set of games. There's lots to talk about. In the middle of the week, it's whatever injury news and stuff like that there's always stuff. And so you don't really get that much of a chance to talk to people about themselves. I like themes. I like roster building. I like getting deep in the weeds about certain topics. And so I love the fact that the off season gives you an opportunity to kind of like dive into it. And, we just did a whole episode a few weeks ago about wide receiver value. And we've seen these contracts go up in the off season for the vets. And we are also seeing a lot of talk about really good wide receiver draft classes for the last few years. And then also pretty much in perpetuity. So what does that mean for how you build rosters in terms of wide receivers and guys getting that big contract in the future? Are we headed towards a place where we treat them like the running backs, and just cycle them through for 5 years and then don't pay them and then go get another good one? And so I think you can start having those types of conversations and really sink your teeth into stuff. And so I kind of like the dead period of the off season a little bit because it gives you a little bit more space to have some of those conversations. But obviously we all love the season for other reasons.
Well, we're going to have one of those conversations here in just a minute.
Yay.
But first, head over to fantasypoints.com, enter promo code VIPERS22 and get 10% off that subscription today. And just like that, that has been the end of the Dynasty Vipers ViperCast. But stay tuned for Behind the Grind with Lindsay Rhodes coming next.